In 1893, Arthur Conan Doyle decided it was time to end his association with the famous detective of his creation. And in the final problem, he ended the life of Sherlock Holmes. The public reacted with outrage and sadness. Stories of readers worldwide wearing black armbands in mourning became the stuff of legend. Mass cancellations nearly bankrupted the Strand magazine, and Conan Doyle received hate mail for the first time in his life, chastising him as a brute for killing the beloved sleuth. But the deed was done, and Doyle was glad to move on. But in the ensuing 7 years, try as he may, none of the author's new creations approached the success of Sherlock Holmes. And, becoming increasingly desperate for an upturn in his fortunes, Doyle, at last, relented. In 1901, he revisited his famous detective in what he imagined would be a singular, one-off adventure, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Set 2 years prior to the demise of Holmes, it wasn't a return as much as a nod to his old friend. But the public's reaction was overwhelming. Sales skyrocketed. Fans clamored for more. And this time, the genie could not be returned to the bottle. So, after much deliberation, Conan Doyle signed a publishing deal for 13 new Sherlock Holmes stories, a deal that made him the world's highest-paid writer. And in 1903, Sherlock Holmes officially returned to the empty house. 82 years later, following the airing of Granada's adaptation of The Final Problem, the show's future was unclear. Though critically successful in the UK, the series had failed to garner any true commercial victory. Another series, therefore, seemed unlikely. Until, in March of 1985, Granada caught wind of something rather extraordinary afoot in the United States. In Granada's Greatest Detective, Keith Frankel states, "Following the broadcast of the first 7 episodes, Cox and Brett were suddenly being feted by American critics and audiences alike at Holmesian conventions across the country. The series was a hit in America, critically, but more important, financially." And with that, the wheels of production were once again set in motion. 7 additional pictures were greenlit, and it seemed that a new series was inevitable. But the biggest piece of the puzzle was missing from the board. With no contractual requirement to return, Jeremy Brett had a decision to make. Still mourning the loss of his wife Joan, he had taken time away from Manchester to re-examine his direction. But one day, while this reappraisal was occurring, Mr. Brett was addressed by a local taxi driver, who told him, "Sherlock Holmes is our hero, you know." The actor was astonished. "I was amazed," he later admitted to the TV Times. "I had never thought of Holmes as a hero before. But as I thought about it, I realized that Holmes works for the poor, and he can't be bothered with the rich. So yes, he really is a sort of hero." This realization, along with the support of his family and friends, restored Jeremy Brett's determination to continue. The time had come for Sherlock Holmes to return. Following the completion of the final problem, series producer Michael Cox had been reassigned to his original position as head of drama series for Granada Television. But in his book, he recorded his recollections of that uncertain transition. He wrote, "For a while, there was no decision about bringing Holmes back to life. The first 7 films had been a prestige success, but had not performed very well in the ratings. Whatever happened, I thought I had left the series in reasonable shape. When the decision finally came, however, I had, of course, to look for a new producer. June Wyndham Davies was the obvious choice. She had been at Granada for a number of years, so she could work the building. And in that time, she had produced some splendid period pieces. June was happy to take up the reins, and we began to plan the return. I did not, however, retire into the background altogether. As executive producer, I took a close interest in the script and casting of each film, but there was an experienced producer in the front line to take the day-to-day decisions. June, however, remained based in London. This was fine for the preparatory stages of production, but not so convenient for the filming, most of which took place in the north. Of course, June made regular visits to Manchester, but inevitably, there were details which one or the other of us overlooked. It is also true to say that she and I approached the series from different angles. I was a Holmes enthusiast, concerned to retain the underlying spirit of the original stories, whereas June was more interested in the highly polished surface. I doubt if this was an assignment she would have chosen for herself. Nevertheless, over the 11 episodes which made up this series and the first 2 feature-length films, we each played our part in keeping the show on the road. New writers and directors were brought in, priorities altered, but to begin with, there was no suggestion that the series was gradually changing. There was still a close relationship between the cases Conan Doyle recounted and the films we based on them. But before filming could commence, another replacement had to be made. According to Michael Cox, David Burke's departure seemed, at first glance, to be a very serious problem. But then you think, hang on, people have survived this in the past. So it seemed to me fortunate that it happened at a point in our filming at which audiences could accept the fact that Watson, 3 years after the events in Switzerland, would look older, a little sadder, would be a different and changed person. But one would try to find someone who looked a little bit like David Burke. I was talking to David on the phone one day, and he said, "Have you thought of Edward Hardwicke? He's a friend of mine." I said, "Well, yes, we have." And he said, "I can't think of anyone better." So the casting switch came both from the production people and the original actor. Edward was the first and only thought from the beginning. To David Stewart Davies, Edward Hardwicke recalled those humble beginnings. He said, "I'd known David Burke and Anna, his wife, for some time. I'd acted with them both, and we knew each other very well. During rehearsals, he was battling with this decision, whether to stay with the Sherlock Holmes series. Then David came to me one day and said that he had made the decision to leave and go to Stratford. He also said that he and Anna had talked about the Watson role and thought that I was ideally suited for it, and that I should get on to my agent. In the meantime, he would speak to Jeremy about it." The new casting was given Jeremy's blessing, and Granada soon followed with a contract. With a fresh producer, a new Dr. Watson, and surging popularity abroad, the Granada series had, like Holmes himself, returned from the dead. And it seemed only fitting that, much like David Burke had done in A Scandal in Bohemia, the new leading man should introduce the continuing adventures of Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
In 1891, at the Reichenbach Falls near Meiringen in Switzerland, Sherlock Holmes finally closed his account with Professor Moriarty, the most dangerous criminal of his generation. The two men were alone in that dreadful place, but the outcome of their struggle was obvious to a trained observer. Holmes had achieved the destruction of his arch-enemy only at the cost of his own life. It is now 3 long years since my dear friend plunged to his death. There, deep down under the swirling water, the infamous Professor Moriarty and the foremost champion of law of his generation will lie together for all time. Even now, there is hardly a corner of London that does not remind me of my old friend. I never walked down Baker Street, where we shared rooms for so many eventful years, without it reminding me only too keenly of the past, and the loss of one I shall ever regard as the best and wisest man I have ever known. I retained a keen interest in criminal matters and supplemented my meager practice by working as a police surgeon. It was in the early spring of 1894 that I was called out early in the morning to an appointment in the West End.
Dr. Watson arrives at the crime scene and is met by his old friend, Inspector Lestrade. As they examine the body of the young man, Lestrade informs him that the Honorable Ronald Adair was killed by a single bullet to the head. No weapon, however, was found, and no sign of entry or motive could be determined. Finished with his examination, the good doctor arranges for an autopsy. Much like A Scandal in Bohemia was not the first Series 1 episode filmed, The Empty House was actually the 4th episode shot for the new series. Michael Cox wanted to give Edward Hardwicke and Jeremy Brett a chance to run in the new partnership before making this crucial episode, a decision for which Hardwicke was grateful. In a 2003 interview, Hardwicke recalled, "The Empty House is a wonderful story, but quite difficult, and I was very grateful for the fact that it was kept back. By that time, I felt much more confident about playing Watson. At least at the beginning of The Empty House, it's Watson with Lestrade, and Holmes is not there, so you have a chance to kind of establish something before the star appears, as it were. And so it was good that I had a bit of a chance to get into it before that." Later, at the inquest, Watson provides his findings to a condescending coroner and listens as the other witnesses provide their testimony as to Ronald Adair's activities on the night of his death. According to one witness, a Colonel Sebastian Moran, he played cards at his club and returned home without incident. Bereft of any forthcoming solution to the mystery, Watson departs, and in so doing, collides with an elderly bibliophile on the courtroom stairs. But he soon boards his cab, returning to his practice at Luke's Road, Kensington. His solitude, however, is soon rudely invaded by the same elderly bookworm, who belabors an apology upon the good doctor.
Dr. Watson!
Yes, indeed, sir. You may go, Ivy. I am exceedingly busy, sir.
Yeah, of course you are, Doctor. Of course you are a man of considerable responsibilities. But I heard you give your address to that cab driver outside the court, and I said to myself, I'll just hobble around and see that kind gentleman. You see, I have a conscience, and tell him that if I was a little gruff in my manner, I meant no harm by it, and I'm much obliged to him for helping me pick up my books.
You make too much of a trifle, sir. You should have spared yourself the journey. Now, if you'll excuse me.
No great journey, sir. I am a neighbour of yours. You will find my little bookshop on the corner of Church Street. May I sit down? Very happy to see you. I'm sure, Doctor. Perhaps you collect? I have the British birds, Catullus, and quite a rare volume of the Holy War. Bargains, every one of them. Just the books you need to fill up your bookcase. Give it a little weight. It does look a little untidy, does it not?
Watson turns, and in an instant, the elderly man is transformed into none other than Sherlock Holmes.
Watson, do you mind if I smoke a cigarette in your consulting room?
Overwhelmed, Watson's vision blurs, and he faints dead away. Moments later, Holmes nurses his old friend back to wakefulness and offers his regrets.
1,000 apologies, my dear Watson. I had no idea that you'd be so affected.
Is it really you? Can it really be that you're alive?
But are you really fit enough to discuss things? I've given you a serious shock by my unnecessarily dramatic reappearance.
No. I'm all right. I'm all right. But indeed, Holmes, I can hardly believe my eyes. Good heavens, to think that you of all men should be here in my consulting. Well, you're not a spirit at least, my dear chap. I'm overjoyed to see you. Sit down. And tell me how you came alive out of that awful chasm.
Oh, I'm glad to stretch myself. It's no joke when a tall man has to take a foot off his stature for several hours on end. Oh, my dear fellow, we have a hard and dangerous night's work ahead of us. Perhaps it'd be better if I gave an account of the whole situation when that work is finished.
No. I'm full of curiosity. I should much prefer to hear now.
But you will come with me tonight.
When you like, where you like.
Ha! Ha! Watson. This is just like the old days. You might have a chance for the mouthful of dinner before we need go.
Dinner, of course, but first, you must tell me everything.
You sure you're all right?
I'm fine.
Well, then. About that chasm. I had no serious difficulty in getting out of it for the simple reason that I was never in it.
You were never in it?
No, Watson. I never was in it. The note that I left on the rock at the Reichenbach Falls was absolutely genuine. I had little doubt that my career had come to an end when I perceived the somewhat sinister figure of Moriarty standing upon the narrow pathway that led to safety. I read an inexorable purpose in his grey eyes. I managed to obtain his courteous permission to write the note, which you afterwards received.
It has remained my most treasured possession.
It was a few months later that I read with great interest your description of my death. It was excellently done, a most picturesque and exciting piece of fiction.
Well, I'm certainly glad from the bottom of my heart that it was fiction. But what did really happen?
When I reached the ledge, I stood at bay. He drew no weapon, but rushed at me and threw his long arms round me. He knew that his game was up and was only anxious to revenge himself upon me. I have, however, some knowledge of Baritsu, or the Japanese system of wrestling, which has, on more than one occasion, been very useful to me.
My God. But how did you get away from that place?
It was not a pleasant business. Even as Professor Moriarty disappeared into oblivion, it struck me what an extraordinary lucky chance fate had placed in my way. I knew that at least one of Moriarty's henchmen would seek my demise now. with even keener determination to revenge their dead leader. But if I could convince the world that I too was dead. So I decided to disappear, then and there.
Holmes climbed to the safety of an adjacent plateau and waited, watching as the doctor returned, and, with the help of the local police, scoured the area for the remains of his departed friend. Jeremy Brett had fond memories of these scenes. To David Stewart Davies, he remembered, "The moment where Holmes stopped himself from calling out to Watson on the hillside was deliberate. It wasn't in the script, but I just wanted to show that Holmes had affections for Watson, and for a fleeting second, they almost got the better of his practical mind. But they don't. It is a moment. In fact, I was very touched by Edward's performance throughout. Watson's obvious relief at his friend's return was quite moving." Michael Cox also adored this moment. He wrote, "There is a favorite moment for me when Holmes is tempted to shout out to his friend, but stifles the impulse and makes his escape into 3 years of oblivion." These scenes were a combination of material shot in Switzerland in 1984 and in North Wales in 1985, because I could not possibly justify a return to Reichenbach. Once the coast was clear, Holmes attempted to vacate the area, but was forced to seek cover as gunshots impacted around him. Moriarty had not been alone, and one of the villain's confederates had witnessed the professor's demise. He was out for revenge.
I did not take long to think about it, Watson. I took to my heels and covered 10 miles over the mountains in the pending darkness. A week later, I found myself in Florence, with the certainty that no one in the world knew what had become of me. I had one confidant, my brother Mycroft. I had to confide in him in order to obtain the money I needed to live.
Of course.
I owe you many apologies, my dear Watson. But it was all important that it should be thought I was dead. And it is quite certain that you would not have written so convincing an account of my unhappy end had you yourself not thought that it was true. I have taken up my pen to write to you, but always I feared lest your affectionate regard might tempt you to some indiscretion which would betray my secret.
I would have thought I was as trustworthy as your brother.
Of course you are, Watson. But you have a kinder heart.
When asked by Peter Haining to compare his experience acting opposite of the two Watsons, Jeremy Brett offered the following. "The thing is, if you work together with the same person, it almost becomes like a marriage. However fresh you try to be on a day-to-day basis, it becomes a known way. So for me, the change of Watsons was like a breath of fresh air, a shot of adrenaline in the arm. What happened was a chemical change, and it is a chemical change, of a new person adding a new element to the friendship. Remember that 3 years have passed since the two men last met, so things have happened to them both, which enabled us to restart the friendship at a different angle. It was revitalizing for me, though not easy for Edward, but he is an immensely sensitive person and a brilliant actor, so it really did not take long for us to find our way into a new relationship. I have this feeling that the return of Sherlock Holmes is better than even the first 13 stories. I can't quite tell you why that is. It is to do with some shift of emphasis, some confidence, some chemistry between Edward and me, but there is definitely something. Holmes goes on to describe his adventures of the past few years. and how he returned to Baker Street that morning in his own person, much to the shock of the gentle Mrs. Hudson. But in light of the recent murder investigation, he decided that action was called for, and the time had come to re-emerge.
And so it was that I found myself in my old rooms, sitting in my old chair, and only wishing that I could have seen my dear friend Watson sitting in the other chair, which he has so often adored.
And so I hope I will be. What a remarkable story.
Are you still in possession of your army revolver?
Well, I think I have it somewhere.
See that you bring it with you tonight. But I have a piece of work for both of us, which, if we bring to a successful conclusion, will in itself justify a man's life on this planet.
I beg you to tell me about it.
You will see and hear enough before morning. Watson, may I occupy your couch for a few hours? The sea was exceedingly rough during the Channel crossing, and the prospect of seeing London again and an imminent encounter with one of Moriarty's confederates, plus the added pleasure of seeing my old friend Watson quite prohibited in sleep on the railway train.
My dear Holmes, please, my bedroom is at your disposal.
No, this will suit me very well. I've had harder beds than this in the past few years.
But before Watson can unearth his revolver, Holmes is fast asleep, and his friend tucks him in as he rests. The Granada Sherlock Holmes series had the good fortune to have two distinct and equally endearing actors in the role of Holmes's biographer. Over the last year, we've come to know Mr. David Burke well, but the time has come to meet our second Dr. Watson. So without further ado, let us introduce Mr. Edward Hardwicke. Born in London on August 7th, 1932, Edward Cedric Hardwicke had quite a legacy to live up to. The son of theatrical royalty, Helena Pickard, and Sir Cedric Hardwicke, Edward, or Ted as he was called by friends, began his film career in Hollywood at the tender age of 10, appearing in Victor Fleming's A Guy Named Joe, opposite Spencer Tracy. Returning home, he attended Stowe School, was a pilot in the RAF during national service, and trained at RADA before making his stage debut in The Impresario of Smyrna at the Arts Theatre in 1954. In those days, Hardwicke regarded his father's success as something of a burden, later admitting, "Whenever I got a job, I always had the feeling everybody was saying, 'Oh, he's only here because his father is Cedric Hardwicke,' and that used to be a big, big burden." But Ted persevered and made his first West End appearance in 1961 as Mr. Muffle in Wildest Dreams. 3 years later, he would join Laurence Olivier's company at the National Theatre, where his notable roles included Montano in Othello, Camille Chandabis in A Flea in Her Ear, and Rosencrantz in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. It was around this time that he began to appear more regularly on the small screen as well, in shows like Danger Man, The Invisible Man, and even playing the role of Davenport in the 1968 adaptation of The Greek Interpreter for the Sherlock Holmes series starring Peter Cushing and Nigel Stock. Sadly, that episode has been lost to the ages. But it was in 1972 that Hardwicke enjoyed his first mainstream success as the mild-mannered, level-headed Captain Pat Grant in the classic BBC series Colditz. His character was based on Officer Pat Reed, one of the few to escape from the notorious German POW camp of the show's title. The series was lauded for presenting believable, three-dimensional characters rather than commonplace caricatures. Colditz opened many doors for Hardwicke, and in the 70s and 80s, he appeared in dozens of television roles, including parts on Tycoon, Thriller, and even portraying Enrico Fermi in the award-winning miniseries Oppenheimer, opposite Sam Waterston and David Suchet. But it was in 1986 that Ted Hardwicke would assume his most remembered role. To Peter Haining, he recalled, "I had seen David Burke playing Watson, and my first reaction was, oh God, have I got to follow that? He had been absolutely marvelous, and I adored the stories. But we were friends, and it was very much due to him that I came into the series, so I knew I had to grab the opportunity with both hands. The choice was made easier by the chance of working with Jeremy Brett, with whom I'd been at the National Theatre Company. In my days at the National, there was a lot of taking over roles from other actors, and I had my fair share of that. I used to think it was better if I had not seen the previous performance, the same feeling I first had about Sherlock Holmes. On the other hand, I remember Laurence Olivier calling me over when I was about to take on a new role and asked me if I had seen the earlier actor. I said I had not, to which he immediately replied, well, go and see him, and be sure to pinch the best bits. He then listed the bits he wanted me to pinch and reassured me by saying that he had done something similar when he was a young man. Never be afraid of stealing, was what he told me. Hardwicke, who had read the stories as a child, confessed that he did not remember them well. He stated, I had read the Sherlock Holmes stories when I was young, and I had to reread everything when the Granada offer came up. My image of the stories was also affected by what I remembered of the Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce films, and so I had to go right back to the basics before filming started. Jeremy was absolutely marvelous in helping me into the part. He is such a talented actor, and right from the very beginning, he was always thinking of new ways of developing the relationship between Holmes and Watson, pushing it into new directions. This I found immensely stimulating. In fact, to David Stewart Davies, he recalled, before we started filming anything, and I had got the job, Jeremy rang me and said, Darling heart, we must have a meal. And we met up in a restaurant in Soho. He was terribly sweet. He was aware that I had a little bit of an inferiority thing about being an actor's son, which I know today is irrelevant, but Jeremy was sensitive to this. I can remember him leaning over the table to me and saying, It's your turn now. And so it was. Hardwicke received universal praise for his continuing portrayal of the Good Doctor. But despite all of the accolades, Edward cherished one compliment above all others. It was paid to me by a makeup girl not long after I had taken over the role, he recalled to Peter Haining. Quite unconsciously, as she was working on my face, she called me David. She apologized and seemed genuinely surprised when I replied, Don't be sorry. I regard that as a great compliment. It's happened 4 times in all, and it convinced me that I had fitted into the role of Dr. Watson with barely a seam showing. And what actor could ask for more? When the Granada series ended in 1994 with The Cardboard Box, Hardwicke began taking on more and more film work. Projects included Richard Attenborough's C.S. Lewis biopic Shadowlands, Richard III with Sir Ian McKellen, 1998's Elizabeth with Cate Blanchett, Roman Polanski's Oliver Twist, and a curious picture from 1997 entitled Photographing Fairies, in which Hardwicke played none other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who befriends a troubled photographer that believes in the existence of mythical creatures.
Mr. Castle. Mr. Castle, your detective work put Sherlock Holmes himself to shame. Congratulations. I'm Arthur Conan Doyle.
Charles Castle.
Thank you. Don't look so glum, Edward. I myself was convinced by this picture. We're traveling in the dark. We must expect to bark our shins now and again. Perhaps this does seem to be a fake. These are dark times. We must cultivate hope like a precious flower. We're pioneers, exploring the borderland between this world and a better one. There are no maps of this territory. Sometimes we stray from the path. Is that a crime?
Hardwicke even crossed over into the video game world, providing voices for Napoleon Total War, Lara Croft Tomb Raider, and Fable 3. His final appearance was in Christopher Morahan's revival of Terence Rattigan's The Winslow Boy in 2001, in which he played the arthritic Arthur Winslow, the same role played by his father in the 1948 film. Near the end of his life, he co-founded the Ralph and Muriel Richardson Foundation. Named for his godfather, the organization is dedicated to relieving the medical needs and hardships of struggling British actors and actresses. Edward Hardwicke died on May 16, 2011, from cancer at the age of 78. Let's return to our story. That night, Holmes and Watson, together again, cautiously make their way to a second-story room inside of an abandoned building.
Do you know where we are?
Surely that is Baker Street.
Exactly. We're in the empty house opposite our old quarters.
Why are we here?
Because it commands such an excellent view of that picturesque pile. Might I trouble you, Watson, to be so kind as to draw a little nearer to the window, taking every precaution not to reveal yourself, and then to look into our old rooms? Let us see whether 3 years of absence have entirely taken away my power to surprise you.
Across the street, Watson observes an astonishing visage of Sherlock Holmes himself, positioned near the window inside their Baker Street sitting room. Aware that the rooms were being surveilled by the one remaining member of Moriarty's gang, Holmes has laid a trap in the form of a wax bust decoy. Suddenly, the familiar sound of a creaking stair-step alerts the duo that they are not alone, and from the shadows, they watch as Colonel Sebastian Moran emerges. Positioning himself near the window, the colonel begins to assemble a singular weapon, an ornate, air-powered rifle. Taking careful aim at the bust, he fires a shot through its head. But before the would-be executioner can retreat, Holmes leaps at his foe. Watson sounds his police whistle in a call for help. And just as Moran gains the upper hand in the struggle, he is knocked senseless by a blow from the handle of the good doctor's pistol. The police, led by Inspector Lestrade, rush in to their aid.
Mr. Holmes! Lestrade, how nice to see you.
So it really is you. I had your message. I could scarce believe it.
You seem to want some unofficial help. 3 undetected murders in 1 year won't do, you know.
Holmes, I know this man.
Of course you do, Watson. So does the inspector.
Colonel Sebastian Moran. Once of Her Majesty's Indian Army and the best heavy game shot our Eastern Empire has ever produced. I believe I'm correct, Colonel, in saying that your bag of tigers still remains unrivaled. I wonder that my simple stratagem could deceive so old a shikari. How many times have you not tethered a young kid under a tree, laid above it with your rifle, and waited for your bait to bring up your tiger? This empty house is my tree, and you are my tiger! The parallel is exact.
You may or may not have just cause for arresting me. But there can be no reason why I should be subjected to the jibes of this person.
If I am in the hands of the law, let things be done in a legal way.
Well, that sounds reasonable. Anything further to say before we go?
Only to ask, what charge you intend to prefer?
What charge, sir? Well, of course, the attempted murder of Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Not so, Lestrade. To you, and you only, belongs the credit of this remarkable arrest. With your usual mixture of cunning and audacity, you have got him.
I don't understand you, Mr. Holmes. Do you mean this man?
The man whom the entire police force has been seeking in vain. Colonel Sebastian Moran, who shot the young Adair through the open window of his parents' house upon the 20th of last month. That is your charge, Lestrade.
The formidable Colonel Sebastian Moran was portrayed by veteran actor Patrick Allen. But for a brief moment in pre-production, the part was almost played by a very different yet familiar face. In his book, Michael Cox reminisced, "When we were planning this episode, it occurred to me that we might have met Colonel Moran before. We learned later that Moran was Moriarty's right-hand man, and it seemed to me that he might have assisted his master in the business of the Red-Headed League. That Duncan Ross, who administered the League, was in fact Moran, and that this would be an interesting sidelight on the story for the cognoscenti. There is, of course, no support for this theory in the canon, and there turned out to be no possibility of putting it forward on this occasion. On consideration, I realized that Duncan Ross probably did not survive the failure of the League. Moriarty was not exactly a forgiving man. The revelation that Moran had a criminal past would also have spoiled the mystery for anyone coming to it afresh. And to clinch matters completely, Richard Wilson, who had played Ross, was not available. In the end, the part was played by the always engaging Patrick Allen. Born in Nyasaland in 1927, Allen was the son of a tobacco farmer, but his parents divorced while he was quite young, and his mother eventually remarried to become the Marchioness of Downshire. Allen initially studied medicine at McGill in Montreal, but after a skiing accident set him back, he began work at a local radio station where he revealed a talent for being on air. And within a few years, he set out for Hollywood. Allen's time in the States was nothing short of an adventure. While working as a nightclub photographer between auditions, he ran into trouble with the local mafia, who objected to some of his pictures. To get away, he borrowed money from the police and went on the run, earning an anonymous living as a lumberjack for a time. Eventually, he made his way back to England, and he promptly made his screen debut as a soldier in Richard Brooks' wartime drama, Battle Circus, with Humphrey Bogart, in 1953. Though many sources list his next role, a 3-word part in Alfred Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder, as his first. From there, he took on various stage and film roles, as heroes and villains alike. And he memorably portrayed the likable smuggler in the 1963 series, Crane, a series which filmed in Morocco and ran for 3 years. Allen later stated, "I don't think I've ever enjoyed myself quite as much." In the 70s, he became well known as the spokesman for many products, including the Society of Snuff Grinders, Blenders, and Purveyors, of which he was an honorary member. In the 1980s, he narrated the first Black Adder series, in which he also appeared, and even lent his voice to the popular Frankie Goes to Hollywood song, Two Tribes, in the guise of a sample taken from recordings he did of the British government's public information films of the 1970s. In his final years, he became known as the King of Voiceover, and he contributed his distinctive vocal talents to numerous radio programs in the UK. Off-screen, Allen was a complete contrast to the gruff characters he often portrayed, being a soft and gentle man whose great love was fishing and the solitude and calm that it brought. Of his time on screen with Jeremy Brett, he recalled, "Jeremy was wonderful to work with and a very big talent, the consummate Sherlock Holmes." Patrick Allen died on July 28, 2006, at the age of 79. Back at Baker Street, Holmes, Watson, and Mrs. Hudson celebrate their victory, and the good housekeeper furnishes them with the spent bullet from the night's adventure. A bullet fired from a special weapon, a silent air gun built for Moriarty's organization by the blind German mechanic von Herder.
Had you heard of the name Moran before Adair's murder?
No, I had not.
Well, such is the price of fame. Would you be so kind as to hand me down my L to M index of biographies, Watson?
My list of M's is a fine one. Mind you, Moriarty's name is enough to make any letter illustrious. I seem to remember Morgan, the poisoner. Merridew, of abominable memory. And there was Matthews, who knocked out my left canine in Charing Cross Station.
Going through the file, Holmes points out an annotation under the name of Sebastian Moran. It reads, "The second most dangerous man in London." It was he, along with Professor Moriarty, who dogged their steps through Switzerland and gave Holmes chase above the Reichenbach Falls.
All I could do was wait and watch the criminal news, knowing that if I was patient, sooner or later he would make a mistake. When I heard of the murder of Ronald Adair, I knew that at last my chance had come. Knowing what I did, was it not certain that Colonel Moran had done it? He played cards with the lad, followed him home from his club, and shot him through the open window from the rooftop opposite. Watson, does anything else remain for me to explain?
Yes. You have not made clear what was Moran's motive in murdering the Honourable Ronald Adair.
There we move into the realms of conjecture. Each may form his own hypothesis upon the present evidence, and yours is as likely to be correct as mine. Watson, have you formed one?
I think so.
Let me hear.
Well, it's not difficult to explain the facts. There must have been a considerable amount of money involved, and Moran had undoubtedly played foul. I think that Adair had discovered that he was cheating.
Splendid.
Very likely he spoke to him privately and threatened to expose him, Moran, unless he voluntarily resigned membership of his club and promised not to play again.
Watson, this is excellent.
Now, exclusion from his club would mean ruin to Moran, who lived by his ill-gotten card gains. Therefore, he murdered Adair. Will it pass?
I think, without doubt, that you have hit upon the truth. Anyway, it'll be verified or disproved at the trial. Meanwhile, come what may, Colonel Moran will trouble us no more.
And the famous air gun of von Herder will embellish the Scotland Yard Museum.
Come in.
The ever-cheerful Mrs. Hudson enters with a tray of celebratory champagne and a toast upon her lips.
Once again, Mr. Sherlock Holmes is free to devote his life to examining those interesting little problems which the complex life of London so plentifully presents. Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Original air date on the ITV network was July 9th, 1986 at 9 p.m. dramatized by John Hawksworth and directed by Howard Baker. Now, The Empty House represents the last of a 3-episode run from Mr. Hawksworth, but we'll see him at the writer's desk again soon, on the second stain. Howard Baker would only direct this single episode of the Granada series, and while his IMDb lists a total of only 16 credits to his name, most of those are for television series, to which he contributed numerous episodes. His stint on Coronation Street, for example, according to the Coronation Street Wiki, lists him as having directed a monumental 124 episodes of the series, having started on that show in 1961 and directing it up to the time of his death in 1993. The journalist and broadcaster Graham MacDonald, who worked with Baker at Granada, recalls that they were both dismissive of Coronation Street when they first heard about its impending production in 1960, saying, "We'll eat our hats if that show ever takes off." Howard Baker died at the age of 61. With a strong new Dr. Watson on Baker Street and an enthusiastic new producer at the series' helm, The Empty House represented a new beginning of sorts for the Granada series. But the path forward would be somewhat different from that of the previous 13 episodes. In his book, Bending the Willow, David Stewart Davies explained, "As is often the way with television companies, when they see they have a guaranteed success on their hands with established values, it is felt that budgets can be cut and expenses pared down a little. These fellows are professionals, the money men say. They can make 10,000 look like $1 million. It had become thin end of the wedge time with the series. There were no serious constraints. These were to come later. But the writing was on the Baker Street wall. But does it show? And how do the new additions to cast and crew measure up? Let's discuss as Luke and I don our fezzes and head over to the armchairs to examine those interesting little problems which the complex life of London so plentifully presents. Holmes' sad death was an ending dramatic. Watson mourns in a matter emphatic. But just wait, can it be? Who's that bookman I see? Watson faints, and he then is ecstatic. Asimov's Sherlockian Limericks. So, are you wearing your fez tonight, Luke?
My fez or my tarbouche?
What's the difference?
I don't know. I don't even know if I said that right.
Well, before we jump into The Empty House, we have some updates on some things. I think we should lead with those, get them out of the way, and then we'll come back to the episode discussion. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Briefly, update number 1 is simply that our movie is finally out. Intersect, the Lovecraftian time travel thriller movie that Luke and I made, is now available, streaming in most countries, on iTunes, Amazon, and more. Also on Blu-ray, available exclusively on our website for the moment at intersectthemovie.com, which we can talk about in a minute. But yeah, I don't know, quite a load off knowing that the movie is finally out.
Yeah, definitely. I don't even know if it's too embarrassing to say how long we've been working on this movie, but it's been a long time.
Yeah, I don't know what we've said on here before, but I think we can at this point safely say we started on this about 10 years ago. It's and you know, at the time it was a crazy ambitious first movie for us. It was special effects, CG creatures, complex plot lines, 2 casts.
Also like shooting on the weekend and shooting at night and things like that. This was supposed to be our stepping stone kind of movie to the next movie, and then the next movie came along before we even finished it. So
yeah, well, when it was, we learned a lot of lessons, and it took so long to get out because we kept putting it on hold, working on other projects, kept coming back to it. But hey, a decade later, It's getting a wide release, and it feels pretty good. So if you enjoy strange, dark, sci-fi time travel stories, please do check it out.
Yeah, and if you happen to just watch the new Bill and Ted movie, it's going to be the perfect segue to this one.
Well, and also, if you need more of Luke and I rambling in your life, we did record a commentary track about the making of the film, which is exclusive to the Blu-ray. So if you want to hear us tell some behind-the-scenes stories about it, do check out that at intersectthemovie.com. It's a region-free Blu-ray, and we can ship it just about anywhere. So
yeah, Intersect is out there. Go get it.
And then our second update has to do with the Sherlockian Relics collection. I wanted to just give everybody an update on that. We've been obviously busy with the movie, but that's just about come to its apex. So we're getting ready to reach out to everybody who has put their name on the list. And Luke, what have you been doing with the relics? Because it's mostly your baby.
Yeah, we have been working on the movie quite a bit, but I have been doing little final touches and refining certain props, specifically the blue carbuncle. We've got one we're really happy with now. The jar or the bottle for the devil's foot. We've gone through a few of those, but we're happy with that. And we just got the posters in for the final Falls of Reichenbach, which I'm really happy with. And we're going to post some pictures of that on the Twitter this week. So check that out.
Yeah, and I mean, there's still some sets available if anyone's interested. Once this run is sold out, we're going to be moving on to the next set of props. So if you're interested, the price is $159 for the set, plus shipping, and it'll be different depending on where you're at. But we'll be sending out links to everyone who's inquired for purchase very, very soon. So thank you for your patience, and I think you're going to be pretty excited. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody who's already written in.
So where to start with the empty house? How about a fun piece of trivia?
All right.
So in 1901, The Hound of the Baskervilles was written, and that was kind of a stopgap story between The Final Problem and Empty House. Empty House was written in 1903. In 1902, Conan Doyle was knighted, became Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, for his efforts in the Boer War, but the public came to believe that it was for bringing Sherlock back from the dead.
I actually didn't know that. That's interesting.
At least that's what the legends say. There's a lot of legends surrounding, this thing, a lot of rumors.
Sure.
The whole thing about, people wearing black armbands in mourning for Sherlock Holmes. It's like for quite a long time that was accepted as canon or, truth, for lack of a better word. And it's only kind of in recent decades that Sherlockian scholars have kind of debunked that as being certainly only a very small number, if anybody, actually wore black armbands for Sherlock Holmes. But it's a fun story, which, it's a meme. That's how those things happen.
Right.
Well, we finally made it to Edward Hardwicke, and I feel like I'm bound to say this is actually one of my favorite Hardwicke performances in the series. I don't know if you agree or disagree. I mean, this was the 4th episode they shot with him.
Yeah.
The reason they did that was to give Edward Hardwicke a chance to, get used to the part, and for Jeremy Brett and Edward Hardwicke to get used to each other and develop a rapport. And it's hard to say what it would be like if they hadn't done that and if this had been the first one they shot, but I feel like this episode is so different for Edward Hardwicke.
Yeah.
He's so emotional, and he's so happy and bubbly and energetic. And I feel like he's almost never like that in another episode, that I don't know that it really made much difference that they gave him the 3-episode lead in,
That's true. But maybe it just kind of sanded off any nerves or something. But I would say, having kind of taken a break because of other projects and actually not watched any episodes in a while, that looking back at our last episode, when we did The Final Problem, it ends with David Burke Watson being very dour and serious. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of my last memory of Watson. And then this one starts up, and he's fairly serious at the beginning, but then, as you say, like when Holmes comes back, he's very playful.
Yeah.
He's very up and bright, and it in my mind, it gives me that vision of old David Burke.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit less Nigel Brucey in that way. Like, he's not the dummy funny. He's just playful.
Well, that's the thing about Edward Hardwicke, is that he's so proper and so underplayed that he's almost like the anti-David Burke.
Right.
But, in this, he has such a wide range of emotions and so much energy. I really do love it. I really do love his performance in this one, and I almost am a little sad that he doesn't have a little bit more of that moving forward, but I just feel like it's not in his character as an actor.
Yeah.
It just takes some getting used to. I had some other thoughts about Edward Hardwicke, but we'll get to those, I think, as we start getting through the episode, going through it point by point.
Sure.
I guess if we just want to start at the beginning, I have a lot of things labeled good and bad and all that kind of thing. I don't know that we'll get to a list because I feel like everything I have in here is either on the good side or the bad side. And not that there's a lot of exceptionally bad things, but my very first note is Mrs. Adair's hokey scream.
Yeah. I will say, though, just because I had to read about it in the Baring Gould, she's not Mrs. Adair. She would be the Countess of Maynooth.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Honestly, that's another note that I always had. When I was younger, I always thought it was his wife. Having not, read the story, they don't really, especially in those beginning moments, they don't explain who anybody is. And to me, that's one of the things that always kind of, I don't want to say soured this episode, but started it off on our weird foot, is that there was just this obvious age disparity there. And, it was kind of strange.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. But my first note was a little different, but it kind of goes into this, which is just, there's not a lot of setup to these characters at the very beginning. Yeah. And maybe that's for effect, but you're introduced to Ronald Adair. He has no lines in the show at all. He's even asked a question and he just doesn't answer. Yeah. And then we meet this woman who's not introduced. And then I think she just has a facial expression. And then they're like, it would have been better with a scream. So they put a scream in after the fact. That's kind of what it felt like. Yeah. And it's, honestly, anybody who's seen this, I don't know if anybody will disagree, but I just feel like it lingers on her open mouth far too long. Yeah, just a little too long. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a little strange, but... Well, my first note is, it felt very fast. It starts out with Ronald Adair, and then we're catching up with Holmes, and then there's not really a mystery. We're just catching the bad guy right at the end. Yeah. There's differences between the story and the episode, clearly. None of the court case happened, and I was kind of thinking, why... what happened there? And it reminded me of a Futurama quote from Fry writing a TV show, and he says, it took an hour for me to write, I thought it'd take an hour to read. And it just felt like there's so much in the story, but on screen it just happens really fast. Yeah, it definitely has an awkwardness to it, which, this director only did one episode, and maybe that's part of the reason why. Yeah, but it's an odd story. It's a little bit like The Final Problem, It's like a bookend, though. We just watched one bookend, and then we're going to the next bookend. Right. On the opposite side, so we're like starting a whole bunch of stuff. And so the mystery is, there's not really a mystery. Watson just guesses at the mystery, and Holmes goes, yep. Yeah, and any mystery that there is conjecture? Well, we'll get to that. Well, it's just like, I have most of my issues with this episode are, like you say, more with the story than the show. It's just kind of like all the implausibilities of everything about this episode. Holmes coming out of retirement based on a news article that had to do with Moran. I don't know. There's so much about it. But again, we'll get to all that. Shortly after that, my next note is also a bad one, which is... I'm not usually one to call out Patrick Gowers, but boy, that music when they're examining the body and they pull up the sheet. Yeah. Which happens, I think, 3 or 4 times in this episode. It's just like the cheesiest, trumpet blare or whatever it is, to make that scary sound. And I don't think they do it again in the series. It doesn't, yeah. Yeah, and it's almost like Patrick Gowers wasn't there for some of this episode, because some of these things are like stock music. They feel like really cheesy, Doctor Who level kind of stuff. It is funny, though, because one of my very early quotes was how good the somber solo violin was at the start of the show. Yeah. So there's some really great stuff in there, too. So it's bizarre. Yeah, and that's a reprise of the Death of Sherlock Holmes music from the Final Problem. Yeah. But I had to look to the story, because I was trying to remember if this is the only time we don't actually see the death wound on something they're investigating. Yeah. And then in the story, it actually says his head had been terribly mutilated by an expanding revolver bullet. Right. So maybe they thought, we can do a little bit of blood on the carpet, Yeah. It probably blew off the entire front of his face, so they probably didn't want to try to get away with that. But maybe they just needed a musical cue there that was a little bit more.
I feel like it would have been better without, to be honest, because, I mean, Edward Hardwicke sells it. He gives a little grimace, and it's fine.
No, he totally does.
I think it's good.
It's almost like a jump scare.
Yeah.
You know?
And also, the best thing about that scene is the fact that when Lestrade lifts up the bloody, covering, he just grabs it by the bloody part, which I thought was kind of funny.
You can wipe it off.
Yeah. Another, note I have about that scene, I don't know if this is a mistake or intentional, or I don't know if we'll ever know, but when they're examining the room and talking about the Honorable Ronald Adair and him being dead and what happened and how this mystery would have been a great one for Sherlock Holmes, they're looking at the window and there is literally like a burn hole mark or something straight through the curtain.
I know.
Which maybe like it was actually just some dirt on the curtain that they couldn't clean and they just went with it. I'm not sure, but I mean, it's kind of weird in this situation where we know a bullet came through and they just decide not to address the fact that there's like a mark.
Yeah, I don't know if that was meant to be like typical Lestrade and Watson, just missing stuff.
Yeah.
One other thing about that same window, or at least that same kind of location, I paused it when they look at the table and all the coins and the banknotes are sitting there, right? Well, first off, there's some giant coins on the table, big like silver dollar coins. But I paused it and I was like, I'm looking around. There's a propelling pencil. There's the list that he was writing. And I hit play and it cuts to Watson and then it pans down to the exact same shot. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Just a good use of the same footage.
My next note is yet again another irksome music note where willful murder by person or persons unknown. Blang.
Yeah. Yeah, that felt a little kind of 80s TV.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so then they make their way to the inquest, which, is fine. I mean, I think the nice touch here is the way that it was written and I guess directed, that let's make Watson seem underappreciated.
Right.
By everybody in the court. And it has the desired effect. It makes you feel like, don't you guys know who this is? But I kind of feel like, in a weird way, everybody would know who that is. It's, it's not like he wasn't involved in criminal cases for years and years before that. And, also the blogger of Sherlock Holmes, I feel like he would probably be something of a celebrity.
It's true. But it's really just the judge who doesn't know him.
Yeah.
And Lestrade is obviously also kind of treating him that way by saying, don't put your bag there,
Right.
It also kind of feels like we're giving the new boy trouble.
Yeah.
Edward Hardwicke's coming in, and everybody's like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
So it feels, a little alienating in that way. I wonder how he felt about that.
Well, he did say in an interview that he was quite pleased that he had some scenes that he could do without Jeremy Brett in them because it's hard to shine when the star next to you is so bright, kind of a thing,
Right.
But he's good in all those scenes, and it's effective. It's effective. That exciser or whoever he is, he was certainly annoying as he was supposed to be.
Yeah, but it's also a good chance for Edward to stretch his legs acting wise.
This episode is weird because again, in ways, it's like it starts off kind of just filling time. You know what I mean? It's like Holmes is going to come in. The mystery really isn't that important to the show. And so all of this stuff in the courtroom, I almost forgot about those scenes when I rewatched it because I was like, oh yeah, I guess his whist player friends all have parts in this courtroom scene. It's not important. But
see, that's the thing is like when I think about this episode, I think, what was the mystery?
Yeah.
Because it seems like a quarter or a third of the show is going, there's this murder. We have no idea who was involved. Here's all these people who might be involved. And then Watson just wraps it up in like the last couple frames of the show.
And I have a big complaint about the murder itself, which I'll come to at the end. I keep saying that. I don't know why, but we'll come back to that.
One other just little tiny detail from the courtroom, watching it on Blu-ray, one thing I never noticed is when Watson is going through his papers, he's got these like hand-drawn, or they appear hand-drawn, skulls from different angles. And they look really neat because it's just like a plain piece of paper and with like a pencil drawing of a skull, but they're really accurate. I'm sure they were, where the bullet was going and stuff like that. You can't see them, but a neat bit of set dressing, prop design. That's
cool. I didn't actually notice that. I'll have to look for that. Well, shortly after that scene, we get to see Jeremy Brett for a brief moment.
But he's in the courthouse.
Oh, is he in the seats?
Yeah.
No, I didn't notice that.
And see, I didn't notice this before, but if you watch it on BritBox, the screen cap or the thumbnail for this episode is him sitting in the courthouse.
Oh, really?
And so, yeah. So then I went back and looked for it, and he's just sitting in there. There's only a couple shots, but there's one shot where I think we're looking at Lestrade or maybe Watson. I can't remember, but he's out of focus in the background.
Interesting.
But he's just there. Yeah, it's kind of neat touch.
Well, and Jeremy Brett, he is great as the old man, as the old bookworm. But again, I have a bad note. I'm just going to have to say it. And it's the dubbed ADR laugh line that he has in there. The whole thing is on set sound. And then there's one line where he's getting into the chair with sitting across from Watson, and he just laughs very loud, and he's like, "Oh, no trouble, sir."
Yeah.
And it's just clearly an inserted line.
I think it stands out because there's one line when he turns to the door to close the door, you lose his dialogue completely because, as you say, it was probably a boom mic. And so maybe it stands out more just because it was so clear right after that.
But the thing I don't like about it is that it sounds like Holmes. It sounds so much like Jeremy Brett, that one line. He's doing a really good voice.
Yeah.
And then that one line they inserted, it's kind of like the moment where he looks up to Watson and says, "You collect?" And it's like,
right.
How could you not recognize him? How could you not recognize that voice? How could you not recognize that face? And I feel like he was pulling it off until that line, and then until that look up. He was keeping his head down the whole time.
Well,
it always just kind of pulls me out a little bit, just the combination of
I know
those
it
two.
does, but I guess there's two things to it. Like in the Bear and Gould, they talk about how there was a collection of examples of how bad Watson is at looking through the makeup. But then you've got Benedict Cumberbatch, where he just puts on a mustache with a pencil, and Martin Freeman can't recognize who he is. So maybe it's, a little bit of we're just having fun with that. If you're not expecting your dead friend to show up in your office,
Yeah, it's true. From the point of view of Watson, I guess we can let it go. It's just from the point of view of the viewer, it's strange reading the comments of people like Michael Cox and others talking about the making of this episode, because they often say things like, from the point of view of the viewer who's fresh to this mystery, or from the point of view of the viewer who doesn't know when Sherlock Holmes is coming back. And I just find myself going, are there any such viewers?
Well,
you know what I mean? I feel like everybody knows these stories in a way.
Yeah, but I think if there's any evidence from this podcast is there are young viewers,
Yeah.
But I guess what I would say is I think the close-up shot of him was probably something more that was more funny to the cast and crew.
Yeah.
So they did it. But imagine how much more effective it would have been if we didn't see him up close and then we got that next shot.
Yeah.
My next note was this great shot of Holmes's reveal.
Yeah.
We push in on Watson. You see him moving in the background of the reflection of the bookcase, and then there's Holmes, and then it goes out of focus and he faints, and it's a perfect reveal.
Right.
And if they wouldn't have put that in there and they would have left that laugh out, it would have shocked the audience.
Yeah.
So you're right. I think it would have been better without it.
It's probably just a moment where they're like, we spent all this time and money on this makeup job. Let's show it at least once in a close-up.
Right, because it'll make everyone laugh. And,
It is interesting. And it's funny, too, because when you look at how made up he is, he's got weird teeth and warts and all kinds of things on his face. And to think that he got all of that off, in that couple of seconds that he took to turn around. I mean, it is pretty magical in a funny way. It does work,
right.
But it's quite a reveal, that's for sure.
Yeah.
My next good note is Jeremy's just kind of physique against the sunny window in the consulting room when he's stretching his back and telling his stories. I just really like those images. They're lit so nicely from the window, and they actually kind of look like Paget illustrations, even though they aren't.
No, they're very iconic, silhouettes.
Yeah.
Yeah. My very next note would be Watson's performance in this scene. How happy he is to see Holmes, but then he's also really upset he didn't have his trust. But he's kind of fighting that the whole time, and you can see it. And it's just a great performance.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking forward to going through all the episodes and enjoying all of Edward Hardwicke's performances coming up. But this is kind of always sticks out in my mind as probably my favorite episode of Edward Hardwicke, just because of these moments.
Right.
My next good note is the kind of flashback Reichenbach fall shots, because,
yeah,
the moments where they're back at the falls are so great. the falls themselves are just so great, and Holmes is, climbing and holding onto things. It's also great, but they actually didn't go back to the Reichenbach Falls to film that stuff. That stuff was all filmed when they were there the first time. So there's a couple shots when you see Watson's coverage, for example, or when Holmes is putting his stick down with the note. That stuff was all shot back in England somewhere.
Yeah, there's a great shot. I think I mentioned it on the final problem, but there's this shot of Moriarty just rushing up the hill, and his top hat flies off because he's just running so fast.
Yeah,
it just looks so manic, and it's a great shot. I kind of hoping that that was something that they had, and they're just like, we have too much good footage, we can't use it. So they got the chance to put it in here.
I think that one gets recycled in Devil's Foot, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But yeah, but even the shots where. I like what they did. I like, even though they were kind of limited, there were no falls at the reshoot moments. Watson's coverage is just a single shot. He's standing on a rock calling out for Holmes. It's distant, but it's good. I think it's the best possible choice they could have made because, first of all, it's not David Burke, but he's wearing the same clothes, which may or may not have fit as well. Yeah. But, they kept it wide. They kept it kind of distant. And, of course, Brett's maybe best moment of the episode is when he goes to kind of call to Watson and stops himself.
Yeah.
It's just so neat. It's such a great choice. I mean, both he and Michael Cox talk about how that's one of their favorite moments in the episode, but there's just something great about it. It's not a big moment. It's just a nice little touch.
Well, can we talk about Baritsu now?
Sure. Or Bartitsu.
Yeah. Or in the Baron Gould, it's also possibly called Bartisu.
Yeah.
So there's 3 different spellings for this word, and I looked it up a little bit more online, but didn't get much further.
Yeah, the Leslie Klinger book, the annotated book, has this little kind of short essay on it. I'll just read it because it is interesting.
All right.
Bartitsu, as it was properly spelled, was a Japanese style of self-defense introduced by E.W. Barton Wright in an article published in the March and April 1899 issues of Pearson's Magazine. Barton Wright had lived in Japan for 3 years. During that time, he had studied with senseis to learn the art of jujitsu, a weaponless method of self-defense developed by samurais that was once meant to complement swordsmanship. Known as the gentle art, jujitsu emphasizes temporarily yielding to the moves of one's attacker and then, in turn, controlling them, crippling or even killing the opponent by use of various holds, blows, and throws. And then he goes on to say, upon his return to England, Barton Wright opened his own martial arts school and published The New Art of Self-Defense, which couched his methods in utterly practical terms. Headings included How to Put a Troublesome Man Out of the Room and One of Many Ways of Defending Yourself When a Man Strikes at Your Face with His Right Fist. What he called Bartitsu, a combination of Barton and Jujitsu, was essentially Jujitsu with some elements of boxing and wrestling thrown in. Barton Wright's boasts of invincibility were met with both enthusiasm and skepticism. Nonetheless, his new method created a small sensation, and he is usually credited with having brought jujitsu, which later spawned into judo, karate, and aikido, to England, even bringing experts over from Japan to aid him in his teachings and exhibition endeavors. While The Empty House was published 4 years after Pearson's article appeared, Holmes's use of Baritsu in grappling with Moriarty at the Reichenbach Falls predated the Barton Wright system by 8 years. How to explain the incongruity? In The Mystery of Baritsu, a sidelight upon Sherlock Holmes's accomplishments, Ralph Judson puts forth the theory that Holmes had actually studied jujitsu, and that Watson, having read Pearson's article by the time he heard Holmes's account, confused the two terms, confused them so much that he actually dropped the T in Bartitsu to make the word sound more like jujitsu. In slipping through Moriarty's grasp, Judson imagines Holmes must have dropped to his knees, gripped with one hand Moriarty's heel, which was closer to the abyss, and lifting the heel, and with it the foot, diagonally away from himself, he must have pushed hard and at the same time with his other hand into the groin of the captured leg, applying terrific leverage. This caused Moriarty to lose completely his balance and give him no time to clutch at his opponent.
Can I say a few things about that?
Yeah, I do.
I have basically the same annotation in the Baron Gould, except for what they say is it's a Japanese system of wrestling, and it takes roughly 7 years to become proficient in this art to reach instinctive actions and reactions to every kind of an attack. So I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I did judo for about 3 years, and I took some jujitsu classes. And wrestling is kind of a loose term for what this is.
Yeah.
This is more about grappling, and usually you start standing up and you throw the other guy.
Right.
So the fact that, what he says about grabbing his foot, I think is a little fanciful. Usually what you're doing is grabbing them by the lapel and chucking them over your shoulder, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, what's funny about that, though, is in the show, I've always thought it was pretty hokey the way they kind of do this, because he kind of like body hugs him and then just literally like lifts him off the ground and throws him from his belly, off the cliff, and Moriarty's arms are just outstretched like, I can't possibly grab you.
Well, but that's kind of in the story.
Yeah.
It says he was like clawing at the air, but this just goes back to like what kind of a hold and what kind of a throw it was, because grabbing him by the ankle and throwing him over the edge, I don't know that that's a move.
Well, true, but I feel like that would be the way you would do it in a way. You know what I mean? Like if you were able to get the guy close to the edge and you could grab his foot and twist him off the edge, I feel like that's probably the only way you'd be safe to not go over with him.
Kind of. It's just that the thing I was really going to say was about how it takes 7 years to become instinctive.
Right.
I mean, you do get instincts. The first few things you learn is someone's coming at you, use their energy against them, and you're just turning with them. So like your instinct is never to go for the foot, because the foot is a weapon. You know what I mean?
Well, and we could talk about
Baritsu all night.
But I will say one last thing about it, and we're probably going to come back to this in a strange way later. When we were at the Sherlock Holmes Museum in London, we've been there a few times, at least 3 times, I think. And each time we've been there, we go in the gift shop, and we talked about this. It's always different merchandise, not usually amazing merchandise, but we try to find something to buy. Last time I was there, I actually picked up a little book called The Sherlock Holmes School of Self-Defense, The Manly Art of Bartitsu, as used against Professor Moriarty, and the author is E.W. Barton Wright. And it's a great little volume. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, it's obviously been, if this is Barton Wright's actual stuff, which I haven't had a chance to research this entirely, but if this is his actual...
Do you think it's just the article?
Well, I think it probably is, because it's it's a short book, but the pictures in it are just fantastic. I mean, if you were to believe this book, almost all of what Bartitsu is using your cane or walking stick to defeat a gentlemanly foe. And the pictures, which usually involve some kind of bicycle in the background, shows 2 gentlemen in hats and frock coats fighting with sticks, walking sticks.
Is it a bicycle or a penny farthing?
It's not a penny farthing, at least in the one I'm looking at right now. But honestly, I know you can buy this book elsewhere. It's a little overpriced for what it is. It's about, I don't know how much I probably paid. I don't know, £9. It still has a sticker on it. That's what I paid at the Sherlock Holmes Museum.
Not that bad then.
Not too bad. US $13. But I recommend this for people's bookshelves. It's just a fun little book. It really is. I bought this, and then we met up with some friends afterwards, and they all wanted to know where I got it.
Yeah.
And they wanted their own copies.
I almost bought it, but I just wanted it to look old.
Yeah.
It just looked really modern. That was my only problem with the cover.
Yeah, it does. And maybe we'll post a photo of it in the show notes or whatever.
No, but it's cool. That was my only critique of it.
We'll talk more about this later, but I mean, I'm in the process of putting together a video for our patrons, which has some images from not only this book, but a handful of books we've collected in the last little while. So this will be among them. But anyone looking for this, go check it out. It is neat.
Well, my next note was about very effective mirror shots in this one.
Yeah.
I kind of already mentioned Holmes in the reflection of Watson's bookcase, but when Holmes shows up at Baker Street and Miss Hudson is there, that's like the perfect use of it, because we notice him and then she notices him and then she responds, and it's just a great moment.
I would say, and my memory could be failing me, but even though this is not a Peter Hammond episode, and a lot of people have written into us going, what's up with these trippy mirror episodes in the last couple of seasons, and they're all directed by Peter Hammond, and they're all trippy in artistic in their own way. But this is not one of his, but I think this is probably the first episode where one might go, wow, there's at least 3 or 4 mirror shots in this one.
Yeah.
So it definitely feels like a motif,
Yeah, I would say these are very effective, and I think the later ones are a bit more creative and artistic.
Yeah.
And weirdly, there is one mirror shot in this where the tilting mirror is just tilted all the way down. And it's like, yeah, that was a missed opportunity.
Yeah, that was probably a take two and it's got messed up, but they had to go with it or something.
Right.
But going back to Mrs. Hudson, this is one of my favorite moments, honestly, in the episode when he meets Mrs. Hudson and like no words, she just she starts sobbing and he doesn't say anything. He just shushes her and hugs her and it's that's a great moment.
The perfect moment for the two of them.
Yeah.
And, not something from the story. It's just a great scene.
Yeah, and Mrs. Hudson hasn't been in it really in a kind of meaty way for quite a while, and she gets a good episode here.
Yeah. Well, they gave her Holmes's own line at the very end of the story.
Yeah.
Which was Holmes talking about himself.
Yeah.
And they give that to Mrs. Hudson, which I thought was great.
It is great, and it's far better than the story, to be honest. Like, what a weird thing for Sherlock Holmes to say about himself.
Yeah, a little egotistical.
I feel like Conan Doyle wanted to end the story with that very nice piece of prose, but he didn't want to give it to Watson, so he gave it to Sherlock Holmes. I don't know. It's strange to hear him talk about himself in the third person.
It's a strange one. Yeah. I mean, maybe he was kind of referencing, all the articles that have been written about him. Like I am back. Sherlock is back.
Right.
Good close-up shot of the Persian slipper overflowing with tobacco in this scene too.
Oh, yeah. And dry tobacco.
Very dry. One
of my next bad notes, again, I hate to pick on Patrick Gowers in this one, but in the moment where Holmes and Watson are on their cab ride to the empty house, there's a scene where they're just sitting in a cab being jostled, and the music is this cheesy, strange music. Like, it's like a comedy cab ride. It's so... I would almost go so far as to say it's not Patrick Gowers. I really, I feel like some of this music, I just am surprised if it is. Maybe the director, wanted something very specific and that's what he asked Patrick Gowers to do. But some of this music, it just really doesn't do well in my view.
It did stick out to me, but I didn't make any notes about it. And I don't know why exactly. Because, I mean, we do usually comment on the music. And I think maybe... I don't know. Maybe it's just because I've been away from it for so long, but it just felt like dated music. So I kind of just went with it.
Yeah.
But as you say, it's usually great. So maybe I just let it go, let it slide.
Yeah.
It is a bit weird. I think the next suspension of disbelief is a practical one. In the story, it talks about this room that they go into, and it's this big room, and there's nothing in it, and the window is really dusty. And there's only a little tiny bit of light coming in the middle of the room, and I couldn't see Holmes from where I was, that kind of a thing. And then when you watch the show, it's like bright lights.
Oh yeah, it's like they're standing in front of a lamp.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to see the actors, and the cameras have to be able to register it. And I get all that, but
there is a great shot. I mean, I do love the shot when they're going up the stairs, and it's his shoe, and and Holmes tests the stair, and then Watson skips over it. Like that's a really neat little moment.
Yeah,
but the room itself, like you said, it's...
Plus there's mirrors everywhere.
Well, right, that's my other thing. Like, it's such a weird moment when they are watching Moran enter, presumably into a mirror.
Yeah.
But he doesn't see them staring right back at him through the mirror. It's this really, really strange impression that you get.
That's one of those movie magic things. I made a note about his Moran's century, as he puts it, Parker, and how he disappears behind the carriage.
Yeah.
He kind of disappears behind it because you can see through it. So you see him walk off.
I wonder if that was meant to be that way or if it was like a failed attempt at having that trick shot where all of a sudden he's gone,
Right. I don't know. But my note was that only works through a camera lens.
Yeah.
Because if he was trying to disappear from Holmes, he would have to be running alongside the carriage like a maniac.
It's true. But Holmes is not looking at him by that point. But I will say this. I really like Jeremy Brett's little look when he's up in the Baker Street window and he sees Parker watching him.
Mm-hmm.
He gives him this little kind of half glance. It's really hard to explain, but I love it. And it's one of those things, like, try to do it yourself. It's pretty hard to do. Like, he gives him this kind of like foreboding.
I'm not looking at you, but I see you.
But I see you, and I'm a little disgusted and worried, but I'm going to turn away. I mean, it's one of those Jeremy Brett moments that we super fans appreciate that, but most people would just go, oh yeah, that's the perfect thing to emote right there. But it's actually pretty hard to do those little emotions,
It's one of those things that it wasn't on the page.
Right, exactly. but it puts Holmes in a certain frame of mind, which is he's fearful, he's concerned, he's worried, he's annoyed. He does all that with one look.
And aware.
Yeah, exactly. And smarter than the other guy.
Right. I would like to talk about Moran coming in. You know, in the story, they mention he's like basically dressed up to go to the opera.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the annotations on this one. But the point I was getting at, I guess, was the gun itself.
Yeah.
Because in the story, it's just a modified air rifle.
Right.
But it all fits into a cane, basically. And he pulls one piece out, I think, and then screws it all together. And I couldn't make out what's actually going on in the episode.
Yeah.
Because he pulls his cane apart, and then he just like swivels this like big piece of cardboard or something out.
Yeah, it's like a mounting board where all the gun pieces are like attached to or something.
Yeah, and I was trying to think practically what's going on there. Does he have it over his shoulder? Is it attached to his leg?
I kind of felt like it was hanging under his coat, like a Highlander sword or something, and he just, got it out, and that's why he was wearing the opera attire for the purposes of the episode.
Right. I mean, I love the prop. I think it's an amazing prop.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely cool.
And that scene, as I said earlier, there's so many close-ups of the prop, which, I mean, all I can say to the people listening, like, those kind of things take time because you have to set up each shot. And when you're on a schedule, those kind of things are the first things to go. So the fact that there was so many, like, of him loading, of him screwing things in and putting in the gear to turn it, and like, they probably spent a lot of money on the prop, and they're like, we're going to shoot this thing.
Yeah.
But it's great, and the sound design is great.
Yeah.
All the clicking and everything, and it's like, it's a really good scene.
No, that's definitely one of the high points of the episode, I think. Though it's followed immediately by one of the hokiest moments of the episode, which is, I won't say the whole fight is hokey, but when Holmes gets grabbed by Moran...
Well, he starts by yelling. Let's start there.
Right. He announces himself by yelling and then, jumping on him. And then the fight itself is really actually not that bad for a few minutes. But then when they kind of separate and Holmes kind of gives him his little Neo pose and like provokes him and gives him the come on.
Yeah.
And then Moran just charges at him and Holmes literally throws his arms into the air and is melodramatically grabbed. Like it's so I don't even know what it is. Like I don't.
It's old-fashioned choreography.
Yeah.
I know Baritsu. Show me.
It was, but I mean, a lot of that fight, I was actually kind of surprised at how intense it felt. It's just that one moment really where.
Yeah, it is, because like when he's choking him.
Yeah.
You can see Jeremy Brett's eyes like, that's a pretty good moment, and like Watson takes a pretty serious tumble.
Yeah, I mean, he bangs his head on the chair and like...
he just gets like chucked into the corner and he like slides on the floor. It's like, it's a pretty serious little scene.
Yeah, it's, again, it's fine. We've had some hokey fighting moments in this show before, shadow boxing and other things, but it's just strange. I feel like that one moment kind of threw it into the overboard for me, but
I think it's redeemed by the next bit of dialogue.
Yeah.
When Jeremy says, "The empty house is my tree and you are the tiger. The parallel is exact."
Yeah.
Like, I think it's a great moment.
It is.
And it's different from the story, but it's like perfectly adapted.
Yeah, I mean, the story version is way longer, which does make the parallel far more exact.
Yeah. But it's just not as cool.
Yeah, exactly.
You want something snappy.
Yeah, and Jeremy Brett kind of has a growl.
Yeah.
They're both kind of growling at each other, both Moran and Holmes in this scene.
Well, the one thing I couldn't figure out is right after he says, or maybe during, the parallel is exact. Is it Lestrade's hand that comes in?
No, I think it's Watson.
Holmes smacks him away.
Yeah. Yeah. We do get a little bit of Lestrade in this episode, certainly at his most bumbling, I guess, but still nice to see him, nice to see Colin Jevons.
Yeah.
My next note is just, again, another great Jeremy Brett moment, kind of the amount of speed with which he moves around Baker Street at the end. It's just, again, It's always nice to see him. I mean, we've been skipping around, you and I, because we've been doing some other things and watching episodes for the show, and seeing these early ones again and just seeing the ease and the speed with which he moves through Baker Street when he's getting the bullet from Mrs. Hudson, showing it to Watson, pointing at it on the table, moving around the room.
Getting in his chair.
Yeah, he's so quick and he's just so excited, and it's really
Fluid.
Nice to see.
Yeah. I had written, we're in Baker Street. What's with all the shiny curtains laying everywhere?
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Or the shiny fabric.
Yeah. I don't know if that was always there.
Yeah, I did. It really stuck out to me. And then the tarbouche or the fez is out.
Yeah.
Like, it just seemed like something was being set up, you know? I don't know. The story doesn't mention it, and they don't mention it on the show, so it's just kind of strange.
Just a little bit of extra stuff. Maybe Mycroft dropped it off.
Or maybe it was his exploits, you know, maybe from his travels, he brought some stuff back with him.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that was one presumption that the cast and crew made about the fez, that Holmes had brought it back for Watson. I like to think that's true, because then when he puts it on, it's fun. My next note is Jeremy Brett's nice little puff when he says he got his left canine knocked out.
I put in that it was a suck.
Yeah, yeah. I like that Watson gets his guess right about Moran's motive in the end, because...
Or that Holmes lets him think he got it right.
Right. I mean, because what's funny is in the story, it's Holmes making the explanation, and it's a little bit more involved, but you get the idea that it's believable because Holmes is the one saying it.
Right.
But in the show, Watson is the one who says it, and even if Holmes didn't say what he does, which is like, excellent.
Yeah, he does this really delayed like finger thing too.
Yeah, yeah.
It's another like it's like a pause moment, and that's your thumbnail for the episode, you know.
Yeah.
But he like holds his finger out for a while, and then he says, "Yes, you were correct." You know.
But it's again, it's a weird choice. I feel like it's probably a Jeremy Brett choice, though we'll probably never know. But I feel like he decided that even though Watson is wrong, he's going to let him have it,
right? Because
he just got home, and let's not ruin things.
And it doesn't even matter, because we caught the guy. It's fine.
Exactly. But in the books, it does matter in a sense, because Colonel Sebastian Moran actually doesn't get executed for these crimes, and he gets mentioned quite a few times.
Yeah. I hate to like always be the one to like pick on the annotations, but there's a lot of stuff for this story.
Yeah.
And a lot of, I mean, conjecture. Like, I'm no expert by any means, but like conjecture on like bullet velocities and things.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe they're more researched than I imagine they are, but just seemed like some weird kind of guesses about, you know, there's no way he could have possibly shot him because it was at an angle, you know, but the whole time we're setting up Moran as like, he's like the best shot in London or in England, you know.
Right.
The fact that he couldn't hit a non-moving target from across the street at a little bit of an angle, you know, it's like, it's weird.
And again, that leads into kind of my overall issues with this episode, which are kind of that there's just so many things that they don't track either between the story and the show or the show and reality. I mean, in the book, Moran is there with Moriarty at the falls, but doesn't help Moriarty.
Well, he's throwing rocks.
He throws rocks at Holmes after the fight.
Right.
But even so, in this, he's supposed to be the greatest shot and all these kinds of things, but he misses Holmes over and over again, but he knows he's alive because he sees him run.
Yeah.
But he somehow just goes back to his routine. You know, like there's so many unanswered questions with this thing.
There's unanswered questions, and then there's just, we don't have all the information. I mean, I was thinking about that because, you know, I had forgotten the way the details all string together. And like I was making notes like, well, one of Moriarty's Confederates was there.
Right.
So they know he's alive. But that doesn't mean that his Confederate, which turns out to be Moran, has any way of tracking Holmes. You know, Moriarty was the mastermind.
Sure.
These people could just be henchmen. I mean, you know, the guy on the street, he's a garroter.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean he has any great knowledge or know how to track Holmes.
Right.
And if Watson says he's dead and we haven't seen him, even though we're lingering outside of Baker Street for 3 years, maybe he is dead. I think the explanation in the show was that this case brought Holmes out and it exposed Moran. But I don't know. To me, it all kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a way to do it, and then there's a way to explain it away also. So I think it's just, what is your intent? And I think the annotation's intent is always to like crap on Watson a little bit and go, his memory's just bad. He doesn't remember this, you know.
Yeah. Well, after having, you know, researched this one and the last one and knowing what I do now know about Arthur Conan Doyle and how much he really didn't even want to write these stories anymore.
Yeah.
I think all these people who try to connect all these dots are just kind of spinning their wheels, because I just think Conan Doyle didn't care.
Yeah.
He just chose a date, and if it wasn't right, so be it. And,
Right.
and he just wanted to make the story happen. So,
well, that's it. Like, I think we called them Doyleisms, or they were arguing about the temperature that night. Where Watson says it's bracing, and like, well, it wouldn't have been bracing except for the fact that Watson spent time in India, so maybe he's not as well. It's like,
yeah, but it's the game. It's the game.
It's the game. I know. I had made a note that somebody could, if they wanted to, make an entire podcast out of these annotations and the game, and call the whole podcast the game.
I'd be surprised if that isn't out there already.
Yeah.
Well, as we come to the end of this episode, it has a nice ending. Mrs. Hudson's sing-songy voice as she gives her toast. It's nice.
Yeah, but I made a note about that. And like, her toast, in a way, it sets off the new series. Holmes is back, but it's also Edward Hardwicke is here.
Right.
And it's like, we're getting back into it, everybody. The public watching at home on TV. Here we all are toasting. I thought it was nice.
Yeah. Although, once again, we do get one of our non-HD images for the final shot, which is a little unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's a really kind of egregious one on Blu-ray. It's a really soft image when they do that whole toast.
There's a lot of them, though. And anytime there's an effect like that, they go pretty bad. But I still just wonder, though, if those elements are completely missing, or if they just decided to leave it as is, because you could have faded it into the old shot, like towards the transition.
Yeah, of course.
It's just a weird choice, and like when the credits are on,
yeah,
it's the same kind of thing, and I feel like you could have retyped the credits and just reshot it, but maybe there really aren't any elements left.
Well, I mean, I feel fairly confident it all just comes down to money. Whatever was the cheapest way to get this thing out on Blu-ray, I'm sure that's what they did.
Oh, yeah.
But along those lines, another sad note, no Paget illustrations at the end, although, a faux Paget version of the toast.
A faux Page?
Pretty sure that's what we get now moving forward. We don't get the Pagets anymore, which I'm sad about.
Yeah.
I don't think they ever come back. I could be wrong, but I miss them already. Let's talk about the books a little bit. I have a handful of notes. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but...
Yeah, same.
This one was first published in Collier's Weekly on September 26th, 1903, and in Strand's October issue. As we already mentioned, so many notes in these books about the dates and all the alternate theories and discrepancies. But one of the alternate theories that kind of made me laugh was from Noah Andre Trudeau's piece entitled "The Second Most Dangerous Man in London, Dangerous to Whom?", in which he says, Colonel Moran could see that Moriarty was about to take a fall through Holmes's efforts and wanted to be sure that Holmes, in fact, eliminated Moriarty so that Moran could take over the organization. So he shot Moriarty just as he was on the verge of the falls, hence Moriarty's horrible scream. Holmes did not hear the shot fired by the silent air gun. This also explains why Moran was situated atop the cliff and not at Moriarty's side. Trudeau also answers the question raised by critics of why Colonel Moran did not prepare himself with a gun to use against Holmes and was inexpediently slinging rocks. If, after killing Moriarty with the gun Moran did bring, Moran's gun jammed, the stone slinging is explained. Finally, Trudeau's theory explains the absence of Moriarty's body, for Moran would have retrieved it to prevent the discovery of the bullet wound. So...
I admit I'm not a gun expert, but I don't know that an air gun would jam like that, because he has to load them one at a time.
This is actually another complaint I have about this episode. So we make the point that this air gun is silent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Multiple times. But when he fires the gun at Holmes's bust, it's certainly not silent. I sampled the sound and put it in the episode.
Well, it's not silent, but it's not a gunshot, I guess.
I suppose.
I actually was at home the other night and somebody drove by just shooting a gun out of their car.
Really?
And it sounded like somebody was banging on the windows. Like, that's how loud it was.
Yeah.
Versus,
Yeah.
Silent, is relative, I guess. My next book note, I had a bunch of notes that I actually started writing just because, like, as I said, I just really didn't remember the story of this episode. I didn't remember the mystery, I guess.
Yeah.
So I kept writing notes down about Moran and Adair, like, well, they were on the same team. Like, why would he kill him? Why did he lock his door? All these things.
Yeah.
And at the very end, as you said, it's given to Watson in the show, but in the story, Holmes just says, well, he locked the door so the ladies wouldn't come in and see that he was writing things down with all these coins and ask him questions.
Yeah.
That's a really weird guess, but also, why did he lock the door?
Well, I think it's because, again, they don't go into this in the show hardly at all, but he and Moran were on a team during a game of whist.
Right.
Which, whist, for those who don't know, is like, it was like kind of like the preeminent card game amongst intellectuals, and it was 2 teams of 2, and it was eventually kind of bridge became the game people played instead. But if you were playing a rubber of whist, which gets mentioned in, what was it, the Red-Headed League, it means you played 3 games and the winner was the first to win 2 of the 3. But Adair was on Moran's team, but he found out he was cheating.
Right.
And so Adair was also the recipient of the winnings, and so he was making that list to let everybody know.
Back.
Yeah, he was going to pay everybody back. He was going to expose Moran, and he was making, a list of who was owed what. And so he didn't want the ladies of the house to find out that that's what was going on, that he was involved in some kind of scheme unbeknownst to him.
I suppose it just felt like an actual mystery.
Yeah.
Like a locked door mystery. And really all it was, well, I just didn't want you to see this list.
Right.
Yeah. It just felt like it was going somewhere.
Yeah, it's a little underwhelming.
That's just what this whole story felt like. We're setting this whole thing up. We're interviewing everybody. And then, oh yeah, well, yeah, he killed him because of this.
Right.
At the very end. It's like, oh, okay. It's a distraction is really what it felt like. It felt like a dodge.
Yeah. It's all just an excuse to get Sherlock Holmes back.
Right. But more than just that, what it felt like, it was an excuse for Moran to be in a tree somewhere else using the air gun. It was just an excuse, I guess, is what I mean, for Holmes to go, he's using a gun, and that's how he's going to try to shoot me.
Yeah, he's using a gun that's mysterious enough that the police can't figure it out. I saw that in the papers. I automatically recognized the air gun, and therefore I'm coming back.
He's going to use that on me, so I'm going to come back and catch him.
Yes.
By posing myself up next to the window.
Yeah, far-fetched is, I guess, the right word.
Yeah.
I mean, if Holmes is aware of the air gun and he knows Moran has it, why bother to wait?
Well,
why not just come back and set a trap for him the next day after Reichenbach?
Because the argument would be, well, you want to catch him in the action, catch him in the act.
Yeah.
But they do catch him in the act, and then Lestrade goes, we're going to arrest you for the attempted murder for Sherlock Holmes. And then Holmes goes, nope.
Right. Yeah.
That's not what we're arresting him for. We're arresting him for the other murder. It's like, so you're right. I mean, I guess it's just we're getting him into a place where he has the gun. So we go, see, he has the gun.
Yeah. Convoluted is another word.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, this isn't my favorite story. I'm going to be honest. It's not my favorite Conan Doyle story, though it is on Conan Doyle's list. It's number 6 on his top 12 list.
I know. And I don't understand that, but maybe it's on his list because he decided to bring it back and, it brought him all this good fortune.
I think so. I think he wrote himself into a corner, and it was very hard to get out of that corner, and he did do it. He did do it in a way that was passable. The audience ate it up. It worked.
Didn't he say his wife gave him the idea?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, so it's a weird one.
Yeah.
My last book note is that in the Paget illustrations of this one, Moran looks surprisingly like Abe Slaney in the Dancing Men episode.
I thought so too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting. But I do like the actor that they chose.
Oh, yeah.
Just because he looks very distinguished and he has a very unique jaw. And one of the notes that I made was, it was a tremendously virile yet sinister face that was turned towards us, with the brow of a philosopher above and the jaw of a sensualist below. The man must have started with great capacities for good or for evil.
Yeah.
I thought, they talk about how amazing this jaw was, and I thought they got a guy with a great jaw.
Yeah, it's interesting because that actor did play quite a few good roles and bad roles in his career. He could do both, and he definitely had that face.
Philosopher or a sensualist, apparently.
Yeah. Well, since we've already kind of gone through the good and the bad and the Jeremy, unless you have any other notes, I think we can go right to the vote. I'm just going to throw, I know I always give a lot of exposition about my vote, but I'm going to throw this one right down. I'm going to say 9.0.
Wow.
Because this one, it just feels like, in a weird way, it feels like a broken episode to me.
But then why are you going 9?
Because it's like, it's still, I consider it the first grouping of top tier episodes,
Okay.
It's still getting a better vote from me than, say, The Crooked Man did, which was my lowest vote of the old days. But it's such a mixed bag. But the good stuff is totally great, and I feel like I can't give Edward Hardwicke's first episode anything less than a 9.
What did I do? Do you have our past scores?
Yes, I do.
What did I give The Crooked Man?
7.1.
Okay, phew.
But I mean, I could go on, but I feel like if you just take it for what it is, which is an excuse to bring Sherlock Holmes back, and that's all that matters in this episode, it's good. Other than a few music cues that are shockingly bad, and a story that doesn't make a lot of sense, it gets done what it needs to get done. And Edward Hardwicke is great. Jeremy's great. There's a lot of great. The gun is great. Mrs. Hudson is great. There's a lot of. I wouldn't feel comfortable giving it a low score with all those great moments in it. So I mean, I'm going to be I was tempted to go lower, but I'm going to keep it at a 9 because I still think it's top echelon.
All right. Well,
don't feel required to do the same.
I don't. But also, I mean, I do feel like, even though we just talked about it, you're listing a bunch of valid points and good points. So I feel like I should raise my score. But I don't think it does all it needs to do. I think it barely does all it needs to do. I mean, I feel like it tied up the whole mystery in the last couple seconds, which to me it's just another one of those episodes I forget about.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't forget about it, but I forget what happens in it. I know Holmes comes back. That's the whole thing I remember. Holmes comes back and there's a dude with a gun.
Yeah.
Those are like the major things, but those aren't the mystery.
Yeah.
The mystery is who killed the Honorable Ronald Adair. And there's so much setup for that in this episode that it just feels like a dodge, like a cheat almost.
Yeah.
I think probably what I did with The Crooked Man is I was going to give it a 7, and then I said, I'll give it a 7.1. And I feel like for this one, I'm going to give it an 8.1 for the same reason. Mrs. Hudson brings it up a 0.1 for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Again, I honestly, to me, my number one factor for giving it a 9 is Edward Hardwicke.
Yeah.
It's my favorite episode with him, so I can't in good conscience give it low.
Yeah.
But it's fine. It's close. We're pretty close in our thinking. Yeah. I could easily have gone lower, but I'm giving it to Edward Hardwicke this time.
Well, we do love him.
Yeah.
And as much love as we give David Burke, he's our first Watson. We're coming into Hardwicke times, and we do love him.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's check out some listener telegrams. Julia writes in to say, Dear Gus and Luke, Sherlock Holmes stories were the first books I read all by myself, and this early acquaintance later developed into one of my major hobbies and indeed academic interests, as I am a linguist. However, the knowledge of the texts does not equal profound knowledge of TV adaptations. Of these, I have watched, I guess, over 150, but the Granada TV series naturally remains my all-time favorite, and I might add, a friend of my darkest moments. This brings me to the main reason Sherlock Holmes stories haven't lost their appeal after so many decades. They fill one with that deep sense of stability and hope that, however banal it may sound, justice and faith and comradeship will triumph. In our changing world, it is like an injection of consistency. That's why I very much look forward to listening to your presentation of The Empty House, which is, in my scholarly opinion, one of the most vivid examples of the early 20th century embodiment of that desire to stabilize the world, prevent it from the mad rotation and the ill balance between major political, economic, and social changes, the collapse of the former class structure, etc., etc. The people of Conan Doyle's generation anticipated these changes and desperately needed something which would remind them that the world they knew was still there. The Empty House brings back a hero, a knight, if you wish, who, we are assured, will continue to battle against everything foul. Conan Doyle, indeed, gave his detective a lot of classical features of a knight. Best regards, Julia. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid observation. You know, we talked to Stephen Fry about this a little bit, about the old school camaraderie between gentlemen and how it was a very different dynamic than it is now. But and I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that men and women were thought of very differently back then, and so the way men acted with their male friends was also very different. But I think the observation about the fact that Holmes is definitely a hero, whether or not the people of the time knew it, I think certainly he definitely was.
Yeah. Weirdly, I was thinking about this, something similar anyway, in relation to our movie, and not just our movie, but like how our movie sits next to other movies. And I thought movies are a reflection of the time and even of your location, but it's also how you interpret your situation within those things. And I think some people write comedies or rom-coms because they're in a good place, and then people write heroes because they want to be in a good place.
Right.
And I think people write dark movies because either they're in a dark place or they enjoy being in a dark place or they enjoy dipping your toe into a dark place because it's not that bad. And so I think it is interesting to actually think of Sherlock that way, in that he's fighting this feeling of hopelessness. And I know they did that specifically with Basil Rathbone. I think they had Holmes fighting the Nazis.
Yeah.
And it was just for morale, for the country.
Right.
And it was, let's use him as kind of Uncle Sam, and rally the troops, rally the people back home.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Stephen Fry said he was kind of the first caped crusader.
Yeah.
David in New York writes in to ask, is there a biography of Jeremy that you recommend? Well, strangely, there isn't a really good standard biography of Jeremy Brett. There are a few things out there. They all come with pretty large caveats, though. The Man Who Became Sherlock Holmes by Terry Manners is, frankly, I wouldn't recommend it. It's a largely gossipy, unannotated fiction with like inner dialogues that Jeremy supposedly had with himself. And, it focuses mainly on sensationalized tragedies of his life. It's just not, I don't know. I haven't read the whole thing through. I've only skimmed it, but I can't really in good conscience recommend that one. Another one is More Than an Actor by W. Gray Champion, which is frankly kind of the same thing. I mean, it's kinder, I guess you might say, more lovingly written, but again, a work of historical fiction, really. It's written like a story with Jeremy Brett, saying things in quotes behind the scenes with his family and friends that are presumably completely made up by the writer. I mean, it's interesting. It hits the main points of his life, but for me, it just didn't do it. It's historical fiction. I just never been a fan of it. I've tried reading Howard Fast's book about Thomas Paine, and I'd rather just read a biography about Thomas Paine.
Yeah.
There is a new book out by Maureen Whitaker called Playing a Part. I say new. It was previously self-published as a blurb book, but it's recently been re-released by MX Publishing, who do a lot of Sherlockian books. And while I'll admit I was a little underwhelmed by the binding and the page layout and other factors of the self-published blurb version, presumably that's all been corrected by the MX Publishing version. It spends time on every single project Jeremy Brett ever worked on. This is the one we looked at together, Luke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's encompassing, and it has a ton of photos, so it's a very fun book. But if I had any criticism of it, it's just that it doesn't dive extremely deep into any of the projects, really. I mean, there's just too many to list. It'd be impossible to do that. So it's admirable in the sense that it's covering absolutely everything exhaustively. Everything's included. But it's a huge book. It costs like $100 for the hardcover on Amazon. It's like a coffee table book. So it's fun for fans. I don't know that I'd call it a biography, though. It's just, biography is a certain word for me.
More of a catalog?
A chronicle. Yeah, exactly. I don't really think there is a Jeremy Brett biography. I think if I had to choose one book to recommend, it would have to be Bending the Willow by David Stuart Davies. It's not a biography either, but there's more in those pages than just Brett's work on the show. It talks about his troubles with bipolar disorder and stuff like that, and it's written by someone who actually spent time with Jeremy Brett. So, unfortunately, that book is out of print and hard to get, but it's not impossible if you keep your eye out. Dancing in the Moonlight is another one by Davies, but good luck finding that one. If you can find that, it's like $1,000, but it's a lot of the same material, so I would recommend Bending the Willow. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
We should start like a publishing company for all these things and get these authors to republish them.
I was kind of thinking maybe when the show is over, we should just write our own biography, but
yeah.
We'll add that to the list of things we can do. Friend of the show, Elias, writes in to say, "Hi again, Gus and Luke.
Hi.
I have 2 things regarding Moriarty to discuss. Firstly, I reread The Final Problem and watched the episode once more, and I was wondering, since it's not mentioned, how long do you think Holmes and Moriarty brawled for on Reichenbach?" Let's pause there to answer that question.
I would say he actually wrote me privately, and I answered him, but I think I'd kind of modify my answer. Having gone back through it in my own mind and thinking about Baritsu or Bartitsu, I think it would have been pretty quick, because I'm not saying you need to be an expert in jiu-jitsu or anything, but I think if Holmes had these instincts, these fighting instincts, especially in something like judo or jiu-jitsu, and they were on a muddy slope and Moriarty's charging at him, it could have been over pretty quick. It could have been a one-toss situation.
Yeah.
In the story, there's not a lot there. I mean, he says they grappled, they grabbed him, he grabbed something, and then, Moriarty was clawing at the sky, and he tossed him over. It's like, probably like that. I mean, I think the show is probably longer than I would have guessed it would be, but it's just not very cinematic if it's quick.
Yeah, I agree with that. Moriarty is an older guy. We don't ever really know if he's received any training. It seems odd that he would frankly just commit suicide by, running at Holmes. But I mean, I think that's kind of what you're led to believe.
That's kind of what's implied in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like he knows he's done. So he's just going to go over there and try to squeeze the life out of him.
Yeah. I mean, if it was a maniacal blind rage situation, then yeah, maybe Moriarty just thought he could overpower Holmes and get him over the edge too or something like that. But yeah, I agree. I think it was probably very quick.
Yeah.
So I'd like to imagine Holmes just did a sweep of the leg and drop kicked him and tripped him over the edge as he ran at him, and it was over immediately.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what I would imagine from someone trained in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. Well, Elias goes on to say, secondly, I was wondering if you know of a book called The Moriarty Papers. It's a really interesting book authored by Sebastian Moran, and it's a collection of diary pages, blueprints, notes, plans, photos, letters, drawings, etc., that relate to the schemes and adventures of Professor Moriarty. I love the book because it shows Moriarty as being secretly behind most of Holmes's cases and several other events, like the assassination of Franz Ferdinand that caused World War I, although surprisingly not the Whitechapel murders. Also, Moriarty writes about how he has all of Scotland Yard under his pay, as well as Irene Adler, Mary Morstan, and Mrs. Hudson. Funny enough, after Reichenbach, Moriarty got a concussion, and his whole personality shifted to good as he became a missionary in Papua New Guinea, obsessed with being kind. But he eventually gets his memory back.
Yeah.
P.S. The jewels of the Tower of London are forgeries. Wink, wink. Well, thanks, Elias. I do have that book right in front of me. And I like books like this that appear to be a collection of, scraps and things. This one is different. It's small. The images online when I bought this made me, think that it was going to be a large book because it is so detailed. But it's actually a very, it's like a pocket-sized book, maybe a little bigger. But it does have some creative things in it. I'm actually, as I mentioned earlier, in the process of putting together a little video review for our Patreon page where I was going to look at this book and a couple others. But I'll give you a spoiler here. If you really want the cream of the crop of these kinds of clipping books, the ones you want to look out for are the 3 volumes put out by Simon Goodenough. They're called the Sherlock Holmes Murder Dossiers. There's only 3 of them. One for Study in Scarlet, one for Sign of 4, one for Hound of the Baskervilles. And it's this kind of thing, but it's not stuff printed in a book. It's literally telegram papers in an envelope tacked in there. It's like spent bullet casings in an envelope glued into the back.
That's cool.
Bloody, remnants of things. I can't remember. I'm trying to remember all the things. Actually, I have one right here. Let me just look at it. The Study in Scarlet dossier has the gold ring in an envelope at the back. It has, the poison pill. It just has all kinds of newspaper clippings. It even has Holmes's, like a page from Holmes's monograph on cigars and cigar ashes. They're really amazing. The problem is, it's not a book. It's literally a dossier with handwritten notes and things like that.
You kind of said good luck finding these too, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, they're not cheap. If you can find them, you might get lucky. You might be able to get one between $30 and $50. The Sign of Four one, I think that's the hardest one to find, I think. And I got lucky and found one for, I think, $60 or $70 or something like that. I can't remember now, but usually it's $100, $200. I mean, some places they're $800, $900 because they put them out. I think they re-released them later, but they did kind of make it a more condensed thing. It didn't come with the props. It just it was like just the pictures and the pages.
Yeah.
And you can find those a little easier, but the original ones that were published in the 80s, they're harder to find, but they're so worth it if you're a fan. They're like the coolest thing I've picked up in the last handful of years, Sherlock related. So I highly recommend looking for them. But yeah, the author is Simon Goodenough. Goodenough is one word. And Sherlock Holmes Murder Dossiers. And yeah, check them out. We'll do that Patreon video eventually. I'm trying to get it together soon. But either way, we'll put some stills on Twitter of these things when we get those out.
Yeah.
The next email comes from David, who writes, "Hi, Gus and Luke. I just wanted to write and say how much I've been enjoying the series. Like many, I first discovered you on YouTube, interviewing Stephen Fry, and checked out the podcast from there. Listening to the shows during lockdown has provided a much-needed escape and has certainly helped make this difficult time more enjoyable." That's cool. Thanks, David. "I have been a fan of the Jeremy Brett Granada series since I first watched it when it first broadcast on ITV here in England in 1984. When my wife and I first met, we discovered we were both fans of the series and bought the DVD box set, which we've watched several times over the years and which continues to bring great enjoyment. We both agree Brett's performance is definitive. We are lucky enough to live near Tatton Park in Cheshire, which is close to Manchester, and where a great many scenes from the series were filmed. I've posted a few photos on Twitter, which I hope you've enjoyed seeing. If you're ever in the Northwest, give us a shout, and we'll give you a guided tour. Looking forward to future episodes. All the best, David."
Yeah, so for anyone listening, if you go to our Twitter, I've actually been retweeting his tweets, and there's been a couple, they've been spaced out over a couple weeks, but if you go back through our Twitter, which there's not a ton of posts, you'll find his pictures, and there's some great stuff in there.
Yeah, they are really nice.
Yeah, the front gate from the Speckled Band, which is really interesting. I actually said it in the comment, but you can see just the effect of a wide lens, because it looks massive in the show, but when he takes a picture of it from further back, you see it's just this kind of like narrow little inlet, and it's interesting to see.
That picture was fascinating to me. I was like, I mean, I know what a wide lens can do, but that was like dramatic.
Yeah, well, because it felt like a castle.
Yeah,
it felt like the front of a castle that he comes riding his horse out of. Grimsby Roylott.
Yeah.
When you see the actual location, it's just smaller.
Yeah. No. David, any pictures you feel good about sharing with us, we will definitely retweet. So yeah, keep taking them. Thank you.
For sure. Yeah.
The next email is from Kate. Kate asks, "Hey Gus and Luke, is the painting above the mantel at Baker Street depicting the duel between Holmes and Moriarty? And if so, did it ever bother you that the painting hung there, looming over Holmes and Watson throughout the lead-up to the showdown in The Final Problem? It was my assumption, formed when I was an impressionable adolescent, that the painting did indeed portray the fight between Holmes and Moriarty. In the empty house, when Holmes returns to Baker Street and sees the funeral bunting over the painting, Holmes acknowledges the painting with a knowing smile. I always interpreted this glance as Holmes fondly remembering how he defeated Moriarty at Reichenbach, shown in the painting. Because of this, I was always bothered and thought this was a real inconsistency of the show. So if that's the case, why would this be overlooked? There are so many shots of Holmes and Watson standing in front of that painting, which to me was a scene that didn't actually occur yet in the timeline. Jeremy Brett will always be my Sherlock Holmes, and I'm so glad to have found out that I am not alone with this claim. Take care. Sincerely, Kate." Well, Kate, thanks. You're actually not crazy, but actually Michael Cox talks about this in his book, and that image, which obviously we're including in our props collection, was actually added by set designer Mike Grimes as a bit of foreshadowing. And here's what Michael Cox wrote in his book. "In our 221B, there was one departure from tradition. Instead of a mirror over the fireplace, Mike Grimes chose a large engraving of a Swiss mountain torrent. His theory was that Holmes loved terrain of that kind and had a premonition that it would have a significant influence on his career. So yeah, I mean, it's a little tongue-in-cheeky, I guess, is how I describe it.
But we do have to say, I mean, you said she's not crazy, but she's half crazy because it's not them actually fighting. There is an illustration of them fighting and going over.
Right.
But this is actually just a woodcut. This is an old woodcut of the falls themselves.
Right.
So they're not in the photo. They're not in the woodcut.
There is a little figure, which is, it's very hard to see in the show, but if once those of you who have picked up this...
It's impossible to see in the show.
yeah, but
there's a couple of them, but there's one really ominous one.
Yeah, and it's so neat when you can see this thing in front of your eyes. It's so neat. That being said, maybe in the next set we could offer this, maybe, but Luke was nice enough, because I've been wanting it forever. He took the Sidney Paget illustration of Holmes and Watson going over the falls, which, it was in like the crease of the paper, so it's very hard to get a copy of that drawing that doesn't have like a distortion in the center. But Luke took his artistry skills, cleaned it up. We blew that one up. So I also have a gigantic poster of that in my house now. And it's really cool. I mean, I could never decide which one to hang, and now I don't have to choose. But maybe we'll make that one available too if people want it. Because I believe those stories are in the public domain and we could get away with that. But both pictures are great. Yeah, the one that's in the show it's majestic. It gives you a sense of vertigo in a weird way when you look at it. It's neat.
Well, it's what's funny too is because we printed that before. I mean, as I said, we have been refining these, but it is still, you still get that effect. It's like the woodcut, the way the lines go. It's very bizarre to look at it up close.
Yeah.
And when you get back from it, it's a neat effect, but. The latest edition that we have, it's like it's huge. It's the size that's in Baker Street. And it's pretty amazing. It's pretty interesting to see.
Yeah.
I was trying to take pictures of the lines just for like scale.
Right.
And it's really intricate. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's a lost art a bit, the skill of wood cutting, and to see it close up like that's pretty neat. Well, let's do one more telegram. This one is from Mary. Mary says, "Dear Gus and Luke, many happy returns for the podcast's first birthday." Thank you, Mary. Obviously, we're playing catch up on emails still, so belated thank you.
Thank you.
I've had to travel quite a lot for work over the past few months, so the podcast has been good company for some long train rides. I wonder what your thoughts are on Mycroft in the original series. Your interview with Gary Hopkins reminded me of how Mycroft was in the Granada series on more occasions than he's in the stories. I think Mycroft is a very interesting character, and it's a shame that Conan Doyle didn't decide to make him a bit more well-rounded. I think my favorite Mycroft is Mark Gatiss in Sherlock for that reason, as they had more of an opportunity to expand his character, literally, in The Abominable Bride.
For sure.
It doesn't hurt that Mark Gatiss is also one of my favorite actors either. Yeah, Mary, he's only in the two stories, The Greek Interpreter and the Bruce Partington plans, though he's mentioned in The Final Problem and The Empty House, and apparently the subject of never-ending conspiracy theories about whether or not he's conspiring against Sherlock. I don't know, Luke, what do you think? Mark Gatiss, I certainly like him in Sherlock. Stephen Fry, the Guy Ritchie films are what they are, but I have to say, I think he may be the most entertaining Mycroft.
Yeah, for sure.
I definitely enjoy him maybe more than any other aspect of those movies, if I'm being honest. Richard E. Grant was good in the case of, I forgot what it's called, The Case of Evil, the TV film. I mean, I'll stand by my comments that I think he was the best part of that film.
I still haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it's okay. Charles Gray, he also played him in the 7% Solution, so, I feel like it has to just go to him.
Yeah, I still maintain Charles Gray is my favorite.
Yeah.
It's hard to say why, because Mark Gatiss is great. He is, but there's something about keeping things special. And, like, when Charles Gray comes on screen, you're just like, oh, there he is.
Yeah.
And it's nice. And you're lucky because you get a little bit more of him.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's because of Jeremy's health, but... I don't know. It just feels like a treat that way. Stephen Fry, as you say, I just like Stephen Fry in everything.
Right.
So,
and same with Richard Grant. He's pretty much good in everything. So,
right.
It's funny how it seems like Mycroft always gets a good actor.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great character.
Sherlock, not necessarily always the case, but
I wonder though if that's just down to Sherlock is hard to play, you know,
Right.
because he's so well loved,
yeah.
and people have so many expectations of him that you either have to just stick to the book or you have to go way off book, and then you're in weird territory.
Yes. Well, back to Mary's letter, she says, a few other people had recommended some Sherlock Holmes related books, so I would like to recommend Anthony Horowitz's novels, The House of Silk and Moriarty, if you haven't read them. The House of Silk is my favorite of the two, but they're both well worth a read and were actually authorized by the Conan Doyle estate. Thanks again, and here's to at least another year of great podcasts.
Yeah.
Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mary. I haven't read either of those. I mean, I don't know. I'm such a purist. It's a failing of mine. I've read so few of the pastiches, but if they were authorized by the Conan Doyle estate, I think I may very well have to pick those up. As for another year of the podcasts, well, I'm not sure when you wrote this email. It might already have been another year. But,
no, we're not that far in.
Yeah.
But the rate we're going, we have a long way ahead of us.
Right. There's quite a few episodes left and a lot of supplemental material coming up. You know, this was a fun one to watch. I'm really looking forward to this season, actually. I have to admit, after spending so much time kind of immersed in David Burkness, you know?
Yeah.
All the research and just watching all the episodes multiple times for this show, kind of the changing of the guard to Edward Hardwicke, it really hit me pretty hard this time.
Yeah.
You know, it took some real adjusting. I had like an emotional reaction to the change that I don't think I'd experienced before, just because, you know, spent so much time getting so chummy with David Burke. So, you know, no complaints.
Yeah.
There's no one I'd rather see take up the mantle, but it did strike me this time. So
I am looking forward to these next episodes. I mean, partially just because I've been spending so much time, you know, looking at the props and things like that. But like Musgrave Ritual,
right,
one of my all-time favorites, you know.
Yeah.
And Devil's Foot's a little further down, but still.
Six Napoleons.
Come on.
I mean, even the Abbey Grange, which I know it's not, it doesn't appear on anybody's lists, but this is one that I find people really like. You know, people we introduced to the show, they remember this episode. They like this episode. And I do too. I think it's a very nice romantic episode.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, with Intersect being out, we'll be buried for the next few weeks in that, but we plan to be releasing some bonus goodies pretty soon on our YouTube channel, which we will obviously share on Twitter and the like. Also, just some interesting kind of extra content coming up in the form of some quite revealing interviews we've been compiling. So pretty excited to share those in the coming weeks too.
Yeah, unfortunately, we probably would have had them out sooner, but now we've got like a stockpile of them. So
right,
we're going to be able to start kicking them out on a little bit more regular frequency.
Lots of Sherlockian conversations coming your way.
Yeah, and another thing is we will be chatting with the guys that I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere in the next few days with their podcast.
Right.
So if you're not following them, definitely do that.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Those guys are going to, I'm sure, school us on all things Sherlockian.
Yeah, it should be fun. And so keep an eye on our Twitter. We will post updates for all these things for Intersect, the Relics Collection, and I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. So follow us on Twitter if you're not already, and stay tuned.
Yeah. All right, well, Holmes has returned, and the new season is off to a great start. As always, a quick welcome to our new listeners. We are out there on the internet at twitter.com/SherlockPod. And we're always happy to hear your thoughts and reminiscences at contact@SherlockPodcast.com. And if you feel inclined, please do drop us a review on iTunes, as they help get the word out on the show. And a sincere thanks, as always, to our Patreon subscribers. If you'd like to join us, you can find us there at patreon.com/SherlockPodcast. Well, the next installment is yet another top-tier entry into the Granada series. I hope you'll join us next time for a journey to the mysterious Abbey Grange. Until then,